Hello and welcome to another episode of Peninsula Biz Buzz. My name is Shelley Smith, here representing my company Premier Rapport and as the Chamber Liaison with the Peninsula SHRM chapter. Over to you, Bob.
Good morning, Bob McKenna here from the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and we're here today for the latest episode of Peninsula Biz Buzz with Steve Holcomb from GENEDGE. Steve, can you tell us what GENEDGE does?
Sure. GENEDGE has been around since the mid-90s, and it is part of a nationwide program that's run under Department of Commerce, specifically under NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it was created in the late 80s, early 90s to assist manufacturing companies to be more successful. And that was the primary focus, was manufacturing. And it operates in all 50 states plus Puerto Rico. There are agents like me that provide consulting services, basically, at a discount to companies that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford consulting help. Some of our funding comes from NIST, and some of our funding comes from the state of Virginia. So we offer discounted services to help businesses be more successful, be more innovative, and to grow. Our target audience typically is manufacturing, industrial, and technology companies that have been in existence for some time. They have an employee base, they have a middle management team, they have revenue, hopefully it's net positive revenue, and have been in the landscape operating for some time. It's sometimes easier to tell who we don't work with. Typically, we don't work frequently with startup companies. There are lots of people who are much more qualified for that than we are. And we typically don't work with retail companies, but pretty much anybody else. We could be engaged to provide consulting services that would range from shop floor process improvement type activities all the way up to strategic planning activities in the boardroom.
Okay, so aside from local manufacturing businesses, who are your partners here in this community, in the Hampton Roads community?
Sure. We work very closely with anybody who's involved in economic development, and we see ourselves as part of the economic development community. So I work very closely with all the economic developers of the 10 cities of Hampton Roads and the 6 counties that make up Hampton Roads. Plus, we work with folks like yourselves, the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, the Williamsburg Chamber of Commerce. So I have all those economic developers in Williamsburg and Newport News and Norfolk and Chesapeake and et cetera, et cetera. All of those are in my speed dial. And every time I make contact with a company in one of those cities or engage to work with them, I try to include the economic development folks that also represent that city.
Okay, so you kind of told us what you were doing prior to COVID-19 response. Are you here alone? Do you have a staff, or are you the consultant for Hampton Roads, for GENEDGE?
I'm the local representative for Hampton Roads. I live in Suffolk, and we have an office that I work out of when I'm not sheltering in place at home. We have an office in Newport News near the Patrick Henry Mall area. Our staffing fluctuates. We had as many as 3 people in that office. Now it's just me. And across the state, we have about 20 agents that work with companies throughout the state. And we all travel a great deal. So we call in the expertise we need for the situation that we're helping a client with. So I might call in somebody from Roanoke to come help work with a company here. In fact, we just did that. We worked with a manufacturing company in Newport News recently, and had a guy come from the Roanoke area to help with a plant layout where they were moving to a new facility. Now, because we're a nationwide network, We also sometimes call in partners from another state who may have a special expertise that we don't have in our own staff. And we also have a very deep pool of third-party providers who are independent consultants that have their own businesses, but they occasionally work with us in an area of expertise. And we work with, I don't know if I mentioned, but we work with an average of about 200 companies a year across Virginia. And
okay, so kind of compare a typical week 5 weeks ago or 2 months ago with a typical week now. I mean, you're in crisis response like everybody else. What do you tell? How about this? What do you tell a typical manufacturing business about surviving this initial phase of COVID-19 response?
Well, it's very different than it was a few weeks ago. My work primarily involved, before COVID-19, it primarily involved calling companies. Often it was a cold call to a company that had never heard of us, and introducing myself and asking for a visit to come out and just tell them about GENEDGE and who we are and what we do. Surprisingly, even though we've been around since the mid-90s, there's still an awful lot of folks that don't know that we're a resource that they could hire and engage. And I'll mention that we are a fee-for-service organization, although we're a not-for-profit. And as I said, our fees are greatly discounted due to federal and state funding. But introducing myself to the manufacturers and other businesses in the area, of which there are a couple of thousand, and then going on visits to those sites and telling them what we do. And ultimately, some of those turn into engagements where we get asked things like, hey, could you help us put together a growth plan for the next 5 years? And we do a lot of that kind of thing, growth planning. Or we need a ISO 9000 certification. Can you help us stand up a quality management system? And we have people that do that. We need help complying with the new DoD cybersecurity requirements. Can you help with that? And we do have third-party staff for that. So ultimately, business development, meeting people, listening to their problems, and where appropriate, offering a proposal to do a certain amount of work. Well, all of that stopped with COVID-19, and I now do all my work out of my office at home. Currently, I'm still making frequent contact with companies, but it tends to be contact to ask a set of questions that the Virginia Department of Health has asked us to delve into. And those questions have to do with, are you producing medical items for this crisis? Are you interested in producing medical items for the crisis? Are you capable? And so we're currently helping the Virginia Department of Health build a database of companies that have the interest and the capability to do work in response to this crisis. Now, in some cases, they're already starting, or they were already thinking about it, and they need some help. And so we've retained on staff an expert, somebody that we've worked with for a lot of years, but an expert in the field of FDA approvals of medical equipment. And so we have a video that we can point people to on our website that gives some basic information. If you're interested in working in producing medical items, here's a video you can watch. And if they need further advice, we set them up for limited phone consultation with our expert at no cost. We pay the cost for that to get them started so that they don't get in trouble in the process of making some new product.
So that's one way that a local manufacturing business can pivot in response to COVID-19, keep their employees on, save their business, and then be able to pivot back to their prior manufacturing, whatever they were manufacturing.
Yes, and that really is our mission, and that's what motivates the people who work at GENEDGE. We're all about sustaining, helping those the companies that we have in Virginia to be ever flourishing and help them sustain, especially through this crisis. But even before this, there is a high risk to small businesses. Often they don't make it, or they don't make it through the first leadership transition when the person who founded the company leaves and passes that on to the next generation. There's a lot of challenges, so we try to help in that space to preserve those businesses and make them successful. During COVID, a lot of people on their own have already chosen to produce medical equipment without help from anybody. They just decided to do it. I thought it was the right thing to do. But sometimes they may not be aware of some of the FDA requirements, or in the case of hand sanitizer and distilleries, there's a lot of those at work. They may or may not be aware of the ABC, alcohol beverage control requirements and guidance that's out there. So we just, where we're asked or where we discover that there's somebody doing that work, we offer advice and what help we can to help them keep going.
So you're doing basically cold calls on distilleries around here saying, hey, are you doing this right? And here's what you got to do.
Well, yeah, but it's not just distilleries. I'm working down through a list of about 500 companies that we went through our database of about 3,000 companies, and here in Hampton Roads identified about 500 that look like they have the capability to produce some type of medical item that's in short supply. Maybe it's hand sanitizer if it's a distillery, but there's also a lot of companies around here that cut and sew and assemble product and could easily switch to things like face masks and gowns and head covers and booties. And so I am doing cold calls to those folks, finding out, are you already doing some work? Do you need information to help guide you? One of the questions we get frequently asked is, do I have any money that I could give them to help set up a new production line? And unfortunately, the answer to that one is no. We don't have any money to give out, but we do try to give out advice and guidance and help where we can to help them either in the short term. Maybe they just want to produce needed items during this crisis. Or we have a couple, like there's one up in the northern end of Newport News that makes medical product, that make protective aprons for x-ray technicians. So they're already in the medical business, but now they're also in the business of making gowns and masks. And they may decide that that's a profitable product line in the future and stick with some of that. So where we can offer help, we try to do that.
So adapt, improvise, and overcome together.
That's a good way to put it.
All right. Shelley, over to you.
That's right.
Steve, are there any companies in particular that you would like to sort of give a shout out to that have been some great success stories, and or are there any percentages in the Hampton Roads area that are doing this that you could share some stats around that?
Yeah, and I guess it's okay to name names. Is that what you're asking in terms of specific companies? And I'm a little cautious because usually when we engage with clients, we have non-disclosure agreements with them. But some that have already shown up in the press for the good work that they're doing are Burlington Medical up at the north end of Newport News. They're the ones that make the aprons, the protective aprons that the lab techs would wear, the x-ray techs. And immediately they switched, because they cut and sew and assemble, and because they're very familiar and very experienced in FDA regulation of medical products. It was relatively simple and straightforward for them to begin to make additional products such as masks and gowns, and they didn't need any help. They have all the expertise, and they're going at it with a purpose and being very successful. My interest is to help make sure that they do those things in a profitable way, So when things quiet down, I'll come back behind and I'll ask, hey, how about a cash flow checkup? Let's take a look at your cash flow situation. It's wonderful to do things out of the goodness of your heart, but the purpose of business is to make more and more money and make more and more money profitably. And so we want to make sure that we can help there. Another example that's been in the news is Ironclad Distillery down in Newport News. And I don't mean to slight anybody by mentioning just Newport News companies, but they switched very early to making hand sanitizer and are having good success selling that out the front door. Although we heard in the Daily Press interview with them a few days ago that they are concerned about the net profit picture. They make more net profit selling their beverage products than they do selling hand sanitizer, and so we want to help where we can to make sure that the decisions are profitable for long-term success. In some cases, some of these companies will stick with this for the long haul, and some of them will probably go back to their main product when that's over. There's another company, I believe it's up in the Toano area, called Bycast, and they normally make souvenirs that get sold in the tourist shops in Williamsburg. Little magnetic things you'd hang on the refrigerator, and little souvenir items that you'd pick up from your vacation in the historic Triangle area. Well, they've switched their capabilities to making the face shields, the clear plastic face shields, because they have laser cutting facilities. They have some vacuum forming equipment, and so on their own, they've jumped right into that face shield production and are having good success with that. Sometimes we can help with supply chains where, I know I could make something, I just don't know where to buy the material. So we have some resources to help with that, or can provide advice. And sometimes they can make something, but they don't know where to sell it. Where's the portal that I can offer this product so that it gets into the right hands in the hospitals? And so we've provided some help with that kind of thing as well.
Beautiful. Steve, is there anything that we didn't ask you or information that you want to share to the listeners and viewers as we go into wrap up?
Well, sure. I think the one thing I would say is that we have a website that has a lot of information on it. Our website is genedge.org, GENEDGE.org. And when you go to that website, there's lots of links and things to click, but in big white letters, it says COVID-19 information, and you just click on that. And you can look at, I'm looking at it right now, you can look at, there's a webinar there about understanding the basics of medical device production. It's a 20-minute webinar that our expert produced for us to explain the difference between Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 protective equipment, and what may be required if you're going to make ventilator parts versus what may be required if you're going to make shoe covers. There's also a survey that we've done of businesses asking what was their impact on their employee base, and there's some interesting findings out of that survey. In particular, we asked what kind of social practices were you taking to keep your workforce safe? And so there's a graph showing kind of in Pareto style, the frequency with which companies were doing things like extra cleaning, or were they restricting delivery drivers, or were they restricting meetings with customers? Were they doing staggering shifts? And so you can see a frequency of how often different companies did these things, and then a compilation of comments that they added about what assistance they were looking for, what kind of layoff policies had been put in place. So it's a pretty interesting survey, and that's out there on our website as well. So and we've still got a survey running that asks 6 real simple, straightforward questions. If you're a manufacturer and you currently produce or thinking about producing items for this crisis, there's still a survey that you can respond to, and somebody will get back to you to flesh out the information there.
Thank you so much. Great information today, incredible resources. We appreciate all the updates. Final comments from you, Bob?
So Steve, we try to keep these episodes to 12 to 15 minutes. You've got so much information that would be very difficult. We could go on for another 15 or 20 minutes easily. I look forward to working with you in the future, even as we come out of this COVID crisis. So things like this throw people together, I think, for reasons that we won't understand until after the crisis is over. But I look forward to working with you through this to help our membership, but also to work towards recovery and growth in our community. So I think you're going to be integral to that, and I appreciate your knowledge and your determination to help all these businesses succeed. So thanks very much.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I also wanted to say I really appreciate what you guys have done at the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce with regard to your daily newsletter and the website that you keep. It's a tremendous set of resources and information that it can be tremendously useful to business. So I encourage people to go look at the VPCC website on COVID-19 and sign up for the newsletter.
Thanks very much, Steve. And if you've got anything you'd like me to post in that newsletter, I'd be very happy to put a link to what you're doing and some couple of paragraphs,
Great.
whatever. All right. Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Stay safe.